Let's work on the Silhouette Cameo for print and cut. I'm making some photo props and some other paper items for a party, and I thought I would show how to use the Silhouette Cameo print and cut feature. This will be a quick tutorial on how I added this white border to the outside of some of the graphics. Now, the graphics that I purchased on Etsy came on a sheet, and I had to do a little bit of editing to get them separated. And I'm not going to go into that much detail today, but I did want to show how to add a border around a graphic item. So in order to add a border or an offset, you need to take the object and add an offset. I am going to just come grab one of these bats. I'm going to Command C to copy and just bring it over to this page for now. Once you have your item selected, you would come to this right hand toolbar and go down to this little star icon, and you will be able to do an offset, which is put a border around the outside of the object, or an internal offset, which is a border towards the inside. So you need to select the item. I'm going to make this larger, and I will select offset. And you can see that it automatically adds an offset. Now, that looks good to me, this default setting, but for example, if I wanted it smaller or larger, I can come and use these arrows. But I cannot click off and then use the arrows. I have to do the adjusting before I click off, because that will apply the offset. So for example, if I needed this bigger, I could go bigger, or I could go smaller. And then I can either hit apply or just click off and it will automatically apply. Now if I move this bat, you can see that this is an offset of that bat. I'm going to undo to get it back exactly. Now if I want to add white just to be able to see it, I can click on that offset, and if I come up to this left hand side, I know that I've selected the offset and not the bat because the color is transparent. If I were to have accidentally clicked on the bat, you can see that it's black because my bat is already black. So I will click the offset, and I will come up and I will select white. And there I can say, yeah, that's great. That's just what I want the border to look like. This is great for things like stickers. Now, these are still two separate items. So if I went to move it, I would need to select both of them. What I can do is select both of them and right click and then group. And then that way I can move it anywhere I want and they move together. Now, if I have grouped them and I go to cut them, I'm going to move this over. So they're grouped because they move together. And if I go up to send, now I'm not connected to my machine, so I will get unavailable. But you will notice that there are two red outlines, and those are cut lines. And so if I were to send it to my machine now, I would get a little tiny white border and the bat, and they would be separate pieces. And of course, that's not what I want. So if I've grouped things together, I can come up on this right hand side after I've gone to send it to my machine and go to cut edge, and it will only cut the outer line. Now you can do changes on the design prior to bringing it to this menu, but this is probably the easiest to get the outline cut. I do want to mention one other thing about print and cut. once you have print your design, you can't move it before you cut it. So for example, if I were to print this, I wouldn't want to move it and bring something else in and print and move it, bring something else and print and move it. Because this design, once you print it, has to be in the exact same spot in order for the machine to cut it correctly. So when I printed all of these items out, I print them at my daughter's when I was babysitting one of my cute little grandsons, and I needed to save each page as a separate file. So for example, when I did this frame, I put the frame on the page. I printed 15 of them out because they were all the same, and I saved this without moving that frame so that when I got home, I could bring up this file. I just named them numbers because that was just faster and easier. I brought up this page to cut this file out. Another one with the couches and the friend sign. I put the 3 items that would fit onto a page. I printed out and I saved this as number 3 so that when I got home, I haven't moved these and I knew that it would cut out fine. So that's the only caveat with the print and cut. Now I guess technically, let's say you were to print this and move it and drag another one in and print and drag another one in and print, and then let's say you wanted to cut them out right then, you could put this last one that you print on your machine and cut it. Then you could, I guess, undo and get this one back and cut it. You don't want to move them around with your, with your trackpad or your mouse or anything. You would have to do the undo. And then once that came back, that would be in the exact spot. That would be the only other way that you could print a bunch and not have to save each file separately. Again, I wasn't at my house, and so I went ahead and just saved them, and it was just much easier and I didn't have to worry, because if for some reason, let's say my battery died and my laptop shut off, or whatever, I closed the program accidentally, all of these prints basically would be wasted and I probably would have been cutting them by hand because there's no way I would have been able to get them back into the same spot. So I hope that makes sense. So let's get to cutting all these cute little items out. Once I have my paper printed and I have all 3 of my registration marks, make sure they're printed, I will place this in the top left corner of the mat. I will add tape. I usually add tape when I'm doing paper products especially. Make sure that it doesn't interfere with the registration marks. And then I will come up and I will load it into my machine. And there, it's hard to see, but there is a line with some arrows that I line the edge of my mat. Let them up against the rollers and hit enter to load. Then I hit send and it will look for the registration marks and then cut the design. Now, before I take my mat and unload it, I will Go ahead and peel back the paper to make sure that it's cut. If for some reason it hasn't cut, I can send it again. And I can only do that if I haven't unloaded the mat. And so they cut perfect. I will unload, and then I can just peel this off, and they are cut. Let's continue. There are a few things I want to talk about print and cut. I do my fair share of print and cut, mostly on cardstock. And if you can see, the settings call for a number 3 depth blade, and that is if you have a new blade. I always think that people tend to get rid of blades way too fast, because once the settings that are the default settings don't cut anymore, they think they need a new blade. But you can tweak the blade depth on the actual blade, and I'll show that in a second, and you can do the force. The force is just how much pressure is put on the blade, and so if something's not quite cutting through, you can increase the force first. Here is a little test piece that I did, and you can see that it didn't quite cut cleanly. And so I had my force, when it comes up under cardstock, it just came up as force 20. And so I just increased it to 33, which is the highest that it will go, and cut all of the rest of the things I needed to cut. I also want to show that my blade that I use for paper, and I only use this for paper so it's easier to tweak. Paper makes the blade dull faster. And so on my blade, you can see this little red dot. I have my blade all the way to the number 10. So it's recommended to have a 3, which is what, with a brand new blade, it's sharp, it's new. And I just go little by little. Once my number 3 that it suggests does not cut, and if I go up to the force of 33 and I still get cuts that aren't clean, the next thing I will do is I will increase to 4. I will back the force back down until it cut, till I find the cutting on 4, and then I'll just go from there. Once, let's say, number 4 starts not quite cutting all the way through, I will increase the force a couple notches. I don't always increase it right to 33 at first. Sometimes it just needs a notch or 2 of the force changed. Then I will just keep going. I will, eventually 4 will not cut, so I will move to 5 to 6. So I have moved all the way up to 10. Again, this blade is probably 3-4 years old, and I do my fair share of cutting on cardstock. And you can see all of the things that I cut today. I used this blade. It's set at a number 10, and the force is 33. So once this stops cutting and I start getting cuts like this again with the highest blade depth and the highest force, then this, is pretty used up. I use a completely separate blade when I cut vinyl and when I cut HTV. And although you don't have to use separate blades, when I do use separate blades, it's much easier to tweak these settings because it's already set for that particular material. I hope that makes sense. It can save you buying blades when you don't really need to. Again, some people think that whether they're cutting vinyl or HTV, which is the heat transfer vinyl for things like t-shirts or paper, that if it doesn't cut on this setting that the machine gives you, that your blade needs to be replaced. And that is not true. I have blades that I've had for years and years and years. And, you know, you can save where you can save as far as money and get the use out of your blades. This white blade that I just put back into my machine after cutting all of the paper is a premium blade. When I needed a new blade for adhesive vinyl, that is the only thing that they had at the time. Again, this is probably a blade that's 3 or 4 years old. And I only use this blade for adhesive vinyl, but I always keep it in my machine because I cut adhesive vinyl most of the time. And so I keep that one in my machine and just trade it out when I'm cutting other things. So I wanted to show another thing that I do. I printed out these tags. You remember I print and cut some of these tags along with the little frames. And I just did that because I was printing and I saved paper. So I went ahead and did the print and cut for these. But I had a whole bunch of tags that I wanted to make, and I didn't want to really waste print and cut on these when I can just use a paper cutter because they're just all straight cuts and they're very easy to see. And this is the paper trimmer I use 99% of the time. It's old, and it uses just the single edge razor blade that you can find. I get a pack of 100 at Home Depot. And this is my second one that my daughter got me. I had my first one, gosh, I probably had it 20 years, and finally it just wasn't as accurate, and so she bought me another one. And these are something that aren't made anymore. I think she got it on eBay. I am going to just be so sad when I can't use this anymore. Like I said, when I use this for paper cutting, this is what I use probably 99.9% of the time. Anyway, so I will just cut these. I lined them up on my program so that I could just line up from here to here and just cut them. And then I will just go, you know, I can easily see where to cut the tops. I'll cut all the top and then cut each little corner off. Something else I wanted to show is I cut these little tags, these little food tags with one tag just so that I wouldn't waste paper. And I always test something first, and that's when I adjust my blade. And that's when I adjusted my blade up to the 33/4. And so, of course, I don't throw these away that have these little edges that weren't quite cut. With straight edge like this tag, it's pretty easy just to trim those little, you know, those little hairs off. Something like this tag that has some of these little paper, I just will take a fingernail file, and it's just kind of like sanding when you cut wood and you have, you know, the edge that needs to be sanded. kind of sand towards the back. Then you don't waste anything that you've printed. So here are all the things I cut out for my daughter-in-law's surprise party. Then I've got all the thank you tags that I will punch holes in and will tie to a little thank you gift. These are all for the food. And then frames that have the center cut out that we're going to put pictures of her in.